Okay, so some background and context before we dive in. The purpose of this interview is to gain better understanding of how investors research, plan, and buy mutual funds online. And I've got a participant on the other side of the conversation here. And I want to set three quick expectations with you. So you can tell me if you
Sure.
agree with the following expectations. There are three quick expectations. One is that throughout the interview, if there's anything you don't feel comfortable responding to, you can simply say pass and we will move on. Second one is to avoid me saying yep, throughout the interview. I would just acknowledge your insights by proceeding on to the next question. It's not me being rude, and if I feel there's more to uncover, I'll just follow up with more questions. Does that sound good?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. And the third one is like there are no right and wrong answers. The goal of these interviews is to hear your unique perspective and your experiences related to investing online and mutual funds, to be very specific. And nothing you say or like share any experience with me is going to be boring to me. I would love to know as much as you can tell me. All right.
Sure.
And lastly, quick disclaimer, this session will be recorded for education purposes. To maintain your privacy and all confidential and personal details that you mentioned throughout the interview will be removed from the file recording. Can you please confirm you're happy for us to move ahead?
Sure. Thank you.
All right. So the interview is going to be broken up in two parts. First is like few psychographic questions, and then we're going to dive deep into questions where I'll ask you to think about a specific experience when you go about investing in mutual funds. So let's dive right in if you're ready.
Yeah, we can start.
All right. So first off is lifestyle questions related to like investing in mutual funds. Are you more of, would you consider yourself to be more of a risk taker or have more of a conservative investing style?
The current stage I am in, I consider myself as a risk taker.
Oh, all right. So how often do you invest in mutual funds, to be very specific? Is it like, yeah.
Sure. So there isn't a specific timeline which I follow, though I follow a principle of disciplined investing. I tend to follow the market regularly, and if I see any regular dips in the market, I tend to capitalize on it and make a certain investment. Having said that, I also make regular monthly SIPs into some specific funds of my choice.
And so what motivated you to get started into investing?
Sure. So I come from a very typical family where we have learned more specifically about fixed income instruments to grow our wealth. However, after studying commerce in my 11th and 12th standard and coming to a commerce college, I realized that there is a big deficiency in the current fixed income instruments we have. With the rising cost of inflation, there is a need to there is a regular need to beat the inflation rate and adjust your returns to grow your wealth at a certain rate. So coming to college, I understand more about finance, about different things, about different concepts and instruments into the market. And at that point of time, I stumbled upon mutual funds as a safe and a diversified option to grow my wealth.
Interesting. So you mentioned fixed income instruments as a way to, or as a vehicle to beat inflation. Are there any particular type of investment instruments that you really like? Could not necessarily be mutual funds.
Sure. So mutual funds is definitely one of it. Apart from that, I do have a certain exposure in equity investments as well. Some specific sectors and specific stocks, which I am pretty confident about. Apart from that, with the rise in the technology and different instruments being offered, cryptocurrency and blockchain is something which I'm also very excited about and tend to diversify a bit of my total portfolio exposure into it. Post that, I always keep a specific emergency fund in the form of liquid deposits with myself, which can be available at a certain point of time. So I tend to follow a very mixed approach and a diversified approach to manage my portfolio. But mutual funds and equity take the lion's share out of it.
All right, got it. So moving on to like tools. So like what tools do you generally use when you're trying to invest in stuff? Anything that you use to make sense of your investments?
Sure. So this question is regarding the tools I use to make investment, or the tools I use to make my understanding about or do my own research. So what is it about, if I may ask?
It could be anything, but for now, I'll just like you to talk about like how you make sense of the market and how you see, how you calculate specific things and when you think about investing in general. Could be about anything, to be very honest.
Sure, sure, sure. Thanks for that. So I follow the news very regularly. I'm an avid reader about the finance and the different economic sentiments that grow in the market. So I tend to follow the news regularly. That's the primary source, and I think that is the source that one should be most confident about while making an investment, because that keeps you really up to date with the market. Number one is the news. Second one, I'd say there are certain websites and certain research reports which I tend to follow. Some websites basically, which give me a sense about what's happening in the market and what are the new upcoming trends which are following up. Coupled with that, I use different, market tools like Screener, Investing.com, or different broker applications to, do some more research in detail about a certain topic which I'm more interested in. So a general mix of everything which is available on the internet, I'll say that is what I use to dwell my knowledge about.
That makes sense. So you mentioned quite a lot of tools. Is there any one that you really prefer, and it is your go-to tool that you always like checking it out, taking it out on a particular tool?
Sure. So I won't say a particular tool, but a website by the name of Screener. It's an India crafted website, and I really like the user interface. I generally use that tool specifically, if I say, to understand the financials about the company, what are the different range of metrics which the company is trading at alongside its peers. If I want to understand something about the technical chart or something, that is again which is very helpful. And then understanding about the business, taking out all the annual reports. So I think that is one tool that I really look after and go through on a regular basis in case I want to do a research on a particular stock. Having said that, this is something which is very specific to a particular stock or a share or any mutual fund which I want to understand. Apart from that, as I said, in case of I tend to follow the news at a very handy level. So that is the biggest circle I look at. Normal news, newspapers, different alerts that I've set for myself. And coming to a specific research point, Screener is a tool, or Investing.com is something that I look towards.
Perfect. We're going to touch back on the Screener tool very soon. For now, let's wrap up the psychographic question with the last question before we go into our dive deep questions. So the question is like, what are some of your non-negotiables or like principles that when it comes to investing?
Principles. I feel I'm at a young stage of investing, so I haven't set out a very big defined principles for myself, because I feel principles tend to restrict you to a certain extent. Well, I might be definitely wrong to it. So my principle is not to look at any principle at this stage of time, but just to follow my own, just to follow my own instinct. What I feel I am what I understand, what makes sense to me, and what I feel is going to, be something that is going to beat the market in the coming, let's say, in the coming time. So that is a principle for me. Though I definitely follow principle of not to do any rubbish investing or to take unnecessary advices from someone. Though I definitely love to interact with the people and understand how they look at the market or certain aspects of it. Post that, 80% of my time is dwelled upon doing my own research, because that is something, and I am pretty confident about my skill set, because I feel what all knowledge I've grabbed from the textbooks or from my professors, I can definitely make a good sense out of it, and that can definitely come in handy for me coming 10-15 years down the line. So I think that is something I look after.
All right, thank you for sharing that. So that wraps it up. Now we are moving on to the deeper dive questions. And what's going to happen here is, like, I want you to think back to the time when you had to research, plan, and invest in a mutual fund. So we are going to be very specific now, and we're going to think everything around the context of like buying mutual funds online. So just take a few moments and think about the last time you had to research about it, or like you started your investment in mutual fund. And you can let me know once you remember one of these experiences, and I'll start asking some questions.
Sure. So this has to relate to the first time I invested or anything in the journey.
Yeah, it has to be like the first time let's thought about
Okay.
investing in a mutual fund.
Okay, the first time. Sure. So my investment journey is not that long. I started getting exposure into the markets 4 5 years back, though I was a student at that time. So the quantum is not big, but definitely the research was a bit more healthy at that point of time. So I remember my father having exposure in certain stocks, and he once told me about his investment journey. From there, I understood that the shares that he has invested in doesn't make a lot of sense to me in the coming years. So I pulled the shares out from his demat, and then I started to look at investment options, and then I realized that mutual fund is something which actually makes a lot of sense for him. Uh, and the first time I started taking exposure into mutual fund was to understand about the whole market, how mutual fund as a segment works. Then I realized that it's a big pool in itself. It's an ocean. So there are mutual funds for everything you want. It could be an index for a sector, for a segment. Either you can mix and match different sectors or different instruments as well, say equity or debt. So that was something I was really fascinated about, and that gave me a bit more insight to look more into it. So I dwelled more into the research part and realized that index fund or sector, which would make sense at that point of time. And I realized that financial services was a sector that was really, about to shed up some money into the market, and coupled with the government initiatives and the different policies that the government was looking to set out, I took my first exposure into a mutual fund, which was more long towards the financial service part. And yeah, I think if that makes sense and answers to the question.
Yeah. So you mentioned like 5 6 years ago when you started diving a little bit deep in the stock market. But when was the, if you remember, when was the exact time when you thought about like, okay, let's invest in mutual funds now? I feel confident about my research.
Uh, sure. So as far as I can, circle back into my memory, it was 2017.
Hmm.
2017, I think, was the first time when I took exposure into it. As said, I didn't had a decent amount of earning rate at that point of time, so the
Hmm.
quantum was a bit small. But yeah, that was the first stepping stone into my investment.
And so like discovering all these instruments like stock market, like FDs are already there, gold, and like then discovering mutual funds. How did you feel about mutual funds at that time when you discovered, oh, there's such an instrument that exists, which is called a mutual fund? How did you feel about this?
Sure. So, yeah. So, before entering into the investment journey, as I told you, my previous understanding about investment was more limited to the fixed market instruments like fixed deposits and gold, etc., which we have learned from our parents and the traditional way of learning about it. So, I thought that the investment, that growing your wealth and investing was majorly limited to that. Post that, when I actually got into the outer circle out of my school and started making networks and connections with different people, I realized that investment is actually a big universe in itself. you know you name it and you'll have an instrument of your choice. If you want a safe investment, you can look after FDs. If you're a very risk taker or a you know in that sense of a person, there are tons of instruments into the market. So there is nothing which you want and doesn't exist. There has been an ample scope of investment opportunities for you. It's just that you just have to position yourself and look after what actually makes sense for you, and that's where the research part comes into play.
Hmm.
Because when there is a big ocean, need to you need to find your sweet diving spot into it, and actually that takes the bulk of your time. So I think that finding that sweet segment for you, which actually makes sense for you at a particular point of time, is something to think about and make which actually helps you make a rational decision.
All right. So 2017, you mentioned as an year where you decided like to officially get into mutual funds, but the corpus was not that big. So when did you like officially get into investing? So uh, whether it was starting the SIP or like you got into lump sum and you
Mhm.
started investing through a lump sum. When was that time?
Yeah, sure. So I think the answer would be pretty common for everyone. As soon as everyone receives its first paycheck,
Yeah. Good.
netting
Yeah.
off all the expenses for the parties and etc., you try to churn out a portion to save yourself. So that point came for me when I in 2019 when I graduated and landed a job in a firm. And I remember my first paycheck came in July of 2019, end of July. And in fact, the date was 31st July, if I remember, and 1st of August was my birthday. So I tend to spend most of my the bulk of money into partying and other stuff. But yeah, I think post second half of 2019, my real investment journey started. I had a very clear picture in my mind because from the onset, I was pretty sure what all investment. I had my own investment thesis in mind, like the different
Mm,
instrument or different sections which I need to take exposure to. Obviously, the world is so fast evolving that after every year, or even year is a small word, after every month or a quarter or a half or a semi-annual basis, you tend to find a new instrument into the market, which is actually very tempting for you to invest. So as said, and I'll repeat this word throughout the segment, that you have to be your own judge to make a
mm.
rational decision for yourself. And yeah, I think that was the first time my investment journey started, and yeah, it is good 3 odd years. As I'm doing it, and yeah, I'm pretty much happy about it. There has been my ups and downs, but yeah, it's going good.
So when you start the investment in like 2019, were there any like personal reasons behind investing and specifically talking about investing in a mutual funds? Were there any
Oh,
type of like particular
mhm.
financial goals or like personal goals that you were trying to achieve with that kind of particular mutual fund investment?
Sure. So, when you're that young, not too much young, at that point of time you start investing. I personally didn't had any financial goal in my mind because I think I was it would be too naive for me to think 10 15 years down the line. I'm not that fetched thinker myself. So for me, the basic understanding to invest is what makes sense to you, and I go with that gut feeling and rational, obviously coupled with the research. But I think that is something. I don't look up to any financial. I didn't look up any financial goal or achieving any financial freedom or at that point of time. But yeah, it has been 3 4 years since I'm doing that, and now I realize that there is definitely a need for you to set goals for yourself and
Mm.
make certain investments. But still, I feel I'm still a bit far from making a certain a certain hinder on my head that I have to achieve this, because I feel the life is going to go a long way. It's just that you have to be a disciplined investor, and market definitely rewards you with that.
Mm. Makes sense. So now we're going to like move on to the research part where you actually started researching the mutual funds. All right. And based on your answers, you already do a lot of research. So I'm not going to ask, I have this question where I'm going to ask, like, did you perform any research? That's pretty clear that you did perform a lot of research. So I'm going to skip on to the next question, which is basically like, what websites and tool did you use? I know you mentioned Screener before, but now we can get very specific when we're talking about mutual funds. So you mentioned News previously and you mentioned Screener previously, but now let's talk about the mutual fund part. What websites and tools do you use or like did you use back then?
Sure. So, I started off investing through my dad's Demat account, and he had opened it with India Infoline. That's IIFL, a big India-based financial services company. So yeah, that was the first platform which I used to enter into the mutual fund journey. Number one. Number two, post I had started earning myself different some new age companies which came into the market, like Grow, Upstox, Zerodha, etc. So for primarily for equity, I use Zerodha. For mutual fund investments, till now I have an exposure only in Grow. That's a new company which came up, I think, in 2019, if I'm not wrong, providing different different uh, financial brokerage services. I would say, to be more specific, it's not a financial services company. I really love the user interface and the journey I've experienced so far. Though I'm now facing a bit of hiccups. So I'm trying to, put my portfolio into different, shift my portfolio into some new application or tool which is into the market. But till now, my go-to tool has been Grow. Yeah.
That makes sense. So when you started, so now even now, like you must be like diversifying. You must be playing with your portfolio a little bit, right? You must be with your mutual fund portfolio. You must be investing in new kind of mutual funds and like thinking about that. Is that the case, or are you continuing with the same investment that you had like when you started investing in 2019?
No, I think it's so fast evolving. You have to be up to the standards. You cannot. I'm not kind of a person who puts something into put something at a place and don't look at 10 years down the line. I
Mm.
definitely try to do some quarterly or not a monthly assessment, but a quarterly or a half yearly or even an annual assessment of some of the funds which I am currently exposed to. So yeah, I do check up my mutual funds on a timely basis.